When we've been doing our fantasy drafts recently, these are players that we have actually been reaching on. We've seen their prices. We've seen, okay, we've got 18 picks till our next pick. I'm actually going to take this guy, even though I'm taking him 10, 12 spots before ADP, because we are that high on. Let's start with the first guy here, and it's going to be Josh Downs. Josh Downs, obviously one of our favorites because A, I liked him pre-draft, but B, he got drafted to my favorite team in the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the main reason with Josh Downs' situation that he's fallen in fantasy drafts is because of a guy named Adonai Mitchell. When the Colts went out and drafted Adonai Mitchell, then immediately Josh Downs' value took a pretty big dip, and this is because most people are assuming that Adonai Mitchell was drafted to replace Josh Downs. There are a couple problems with this theory. Number one, they're two completely different players. Adonai Mitchell is going to be a field-stretching X, and Josh Downs is primarily a slot wide receiver. He's taking like 75% of his snaps from the slot, so they're completely different players. Not to mention, Adonai Mitchell is fighting Alec Pierce for the wide receiver 3 job in Indianapolis. We know this because we live here. We're 15 minutes from Lucas Oil as we sit right now, and we know that Alec Pierce is a guy the Colts respect. He's a very good blocking wide receiver. He doesn't have a super good contested catch rate because they do throw him some long bombs, and occasionally he does catch one, but most of the times they want an upgrade there. That's why they drafted Adonai Mitchell. However, Adonai Mitchell, he does lack some skills that Alec Pierce is very good at, and so the Colts have to decide which one they want to start. That doesn't mean that Adonai Mitchell won't end up starting. But again, we're Colts fans. Do take our advice on this one. We know that team inside out. And for Adonai Mitchell, he's not Josh Downs, but he's also not necessarily a threat to Josh Downs. I think the number one threat to Josh Downs in the Indianapolis offense is going to be Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman being such a high-volume target hog, he is going to take some potential targets away from Josh Downs. But when you're looking at what Josh Downs is able to do in his rookie year, he had 98 targets, 68 receptions. His average yards per catch was 11.34, which is very good. He only had 2 touchdowns, but he finishes the wide receiver 43 in PPR leagues in his rookie year playing with a backup quarterback. And I say backup because Gardner Minshew was the backup. He is now the starter for the Raiders, but for the past 3-4 years, Gardner Minshew was a backup, right? And so he played and had that production with a backup QB. Now, again, you know, we say Downs has the wide receiver 2 role in Indianapolis on lockdown. This is factual. This is not something that's going to be debated. And honestly, the fit between Pittman, who is kind of a do-it-all, throw it to the sticks, high-volume receiver, and Adonai Mitchell, who is a crazy athlete, good field stretcher, really good ball skills. When you've got Josh Downs in between those guys, that's honestly a really good fit schematically for the Indianapolis Colts, and also could lend itself to Josh Downs being a very productive receiver even going into next year. Take a look at his route trees from reception perception from last year in his rookie year. You'll notice that his route running has been very good. You'll notice that his success rates against man, 93rd percentile against man coverage. For somebody who's lining up primarily in the slot offside the line, like that's pretty good. Zone 82nd percentile. Press 69th percentile. Nice. So this is a guy that, you know, is kind of known for his speed, for a little bit of his yak ability, but in fact, he was tackled on first contact in like 71% of his catches last year, and in reality, his route running has been really, really good, and not to mention, I mean, look at the success rates on his route for posts and for corners, even for outs and for digs. Like, how often do you see a slot guy that's making those routes as efficiently as Josh Downs is? So he's got a very complete skill set. His route running is ridiculous. He produced at the rookie. He was largely considered when he was drafted a first, second round talent, and he slid all the way to the third and he got knocked for it. We saw him produce, and his value has just steadily declined in fantasy football because of Adonai Mitchell. And so, again, the price, he's the wide receiver 62 on Underdog Fantasy right now compared to Adonai Mitchell being the wide receiver 56. Josh Downs is the wide receiver 2 in Indianapolis being drafted as the wide receiver 3, and that is the reason that we are going to be reaching for Josh Downs.
Yeah, and don't be too scared of the fall off at the end of the season. When he shined was really weeks 1 through 8 at the beginning of the year, and that game log, I mean, you're looking from weeks 3 to 8, it was 13, 5, 15, 13, 23, and 14 points respectively in those games. And then after that, it wasn't really anything of substance. He actually never broke 10 points for the rest of the season and was pretty on and off with targets, though he did get 13 targets in week 12. Just keep in mind that he was nursing a pretty significant knee injury that he did play through for the entire season, and that's kind of why his production started falling off. So keep that in mind when you're looking at his discount and at his price right now, currently behind AD Mitchell on Underdog ADP. So the next guy that we're going to have here is Kyler Murray. And Kyler Murray, it's as simple as this. He's one of the cheaper rushing upside quarterbacks that you're getting in fantasy drafts right now. By cheaper, I mean he's going as the QB7, which, at face value, he's a 7th QB off the board. That doesn't sound that bad. Well, the guys going in front of him, specifically CJ Stroud. We just came out with a video last week where at the end of we're scared to draft these guys. CJ Stroud was one of those guys. We're scared to draft him because he doesn't offer that rushing upside that Kyler Murray does, and Kyler Murray offers the same amount of passing volume. Anthony Richardson going as QB5, unproven, entirely unproven. We love AR. We're super excited to see what he does. His upside, his rushing upside is incredible. Kyler Murray has already demonstrated that he has top 4 quarterback upside when he's healthy and when he's playing, which he will be fully healthy and fully playing and full go with like actual receiving weapons in Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, and then James Conner and Trey Benson in the backfield to help him as well. So to us, this is pretty simple. The rushing upside, 418 rushing yards on 6.24 yards per carry in 2024. That was 11 games, 400 rushing yards when people said that he was going to have less rushing upside coming off of an ACL. And he put up 400 rushing yards in that span. That's pretty dang impressive. When you have him fully healthy, again, a full go going into 2024 with a team that's just all around better, I'm feeling real good about my shot on a rushing upside quarterback in the QB 7 to 10 range in my fantasy football league. Like, that's not something that you're generally seeing. The only other guy you see it with is Jaden Daniels, but it's because he's a rookie. He's an unproven rookie going at QB 11, and he even is a pretty decent value. So
he is a good value.
Let's take our shot on Kyler Murray, please, and definitely go ahead and take him above guys like Burrow and Dak and Love. If you have to take him a half round early just to get your hands on him, a full round, I'm completely fine with it.
Yeah, I am too. Kyler is one of those guys that he has a very safe floor, but his upside, I mean, he has top 3 quarterback finish upside.
Yes.
You saw him do that even just 2 years ago. So He's a guy that I think we're both really high on for Dynasty and fantasy football this year. So next guy here is going to be Kimani Vidal. This is not really a secret in terms of like, okay, obviously there's going to be maybe some opportunity there, and obviously he's on most people's radar because he's a 5th round rookie running back, and when you look at where he's going in underdog fantasy, he's going as the running back 49, so he's going as in the 13th to 14th round right now. So it's not necessarily like a secret. He's being drafted, but the main reason that I look at Kimani Vidal as somebody that I would probably reach to draft is not necessarily because of his skill set. When you're looking at what he was able to do in college, his last year, he had 1,600 rushing yards on 300 attempts. He had 200 receiving yards on 18 receptions for an average of 11.2 yards per reception, which is pretty good. But again, 1,800 all-purpose scrimmage yards. That's not really the reason I'm in on Kimani Vidal. The reason that, number one, very respectable content creator that we like, franchise guy, was in on Kimani Vidal before the draft, and so that kind of put him on our radar. Not to mention when he went to a situation where it's favorable for him to get some opportunity, it kind of even pushed that agenda a little bit more. So kind of listening to other people we trust. But when you're looking at the guys in that running back room, let's talk about Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards' highest finish ever was last year in PPR leagues. He played all 17 games, and he was the running back 25 in an abysmal running back year. For running backs last year, when running back 25 is nothing. He scored 187 PPR points last year. He had only 200 attempts. He had 810 yards, so he's fairly efficient, 4 yards per carry. He had 13 touchdowns. And maybe that's where you say, okay, Gus Edwards is also worth drafting here. When you're looking at where Gus Edwards is going in these drafts, he's being drafted as the running back 1 out of that backfield as running back 36 on underdog. That's pretty good. But one thing you don't see from Gus Edwards is receiving upside. He had 13 targets last year. 13 the whole year. He played 17 games and had 13 targets. Okay, let's move to J.K. Dobbins. Everybody is familiar with J.K. Dobbins and how he really was one of the more talented backs coming out of college we've seen in the last 5 years. Obviously, the health has been an issue. His highest finish ever in PPR leagues was running back 23 after his rookie year and never got up past 50 again. In fact, he's only played 9 games since his rookie year. In 3 seasons. It's obviously concerning. What I will say with this running back room, and I think you would agree with this, is with these running backs, we know what they are. We know what Gus Edwards is. Gus Edwards is, if he's not going to get touchdowns, he's probably not going to produce because he doesn't have a ton of receiving upside. Yeah. And then we know what J.K. Dobbins is. J.K. Dobbins struggles to stay healthy, but when he's on the field, he has potential. But that was 4 years ago. This is J.K. Dobbins' 5th year in the league. Are we really going to bet on J.K. Dobbins to stay healthy this entire year? So when I'm looking at those two guys, I'm looking at Kimani Vidal and saying,
Take the fresh legs.
I'm going to take the guy that has receiving upside, that proved it in college, that was drafted, that's on. I mean, this is a Greg Roman offense. And I do think that people will overplay that a little bit to like use it against Justin Herbert, but it doesn't take away from the fact that there are going to be productive running backs on this team. Yes, Gus Edwards could be productive just because of the touchdown upside alone. But when you're talking about who the receiving back is in LA this year, my guess is it's Kimani Vidal. and you're getting the receiving back in a Greg Roman offense as running back like 50, that's great value to me.
Yeah, and Gus Edwards is going well ahead of these guys at running back 36. Again, if it's at best 33% chance that this guy ends up being, it's just split that way. It's split three ways. Then just take the shot on the guy who's going the cheapest. And Kimani Vidal is right now going pretty much back to back with J.K. Dobbins in the same range. Algier is going right around there. Ray Davis, Jaleel McLaughlin, Jalen Wright, Ty Chandler. I just listed a bunch of running back twos that are behind unquestioned top running backs in their respective offenses. I'm talking about Devon Achane, Aaron Jones, Bijan Robinson, James Cook, Chuba Hubbard going in this range as well behind Jonathan Brooks, Antonio Gibson behind Ramondre Stevenson, Bucky Irving behind Rashad White. Like, Kimani Vidal has the clearest avenue to being potentially the top running back option in his offense. We're not saying that it's for sure 100% going to happen, but at price, you got to be willing, you got to be excited to take that shot because there's no other running back in that range that has that direct of an avenue to be the running back one. They're all an injury away. Kimani Vidal is a good game away from being the top option there. So
I totally agree.
Yeah, Chris Godwin is going to be our next guy here. We were big Chris Godwin truthers last year. It didn't really work out. His opportunity worked out. He got the opportunity that we expected. Mm-hmm. He got the targets and stayed healthy the entire year. And then Mike Evans decided to have honestly one of the better years of his entire career. And it sucked. It honestly was incredibly unfortunate. And Godwin didn't really pay the dividends that we expected. So what ended up happening to Godwin as a result, he lost a ton of value in your fantasy drafts going into this year. His price right now is wide receiver 36. He is going as a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4. Other than the targets that he got, like number one, you got to look at multiple variables here. Like let's look at Mike Evans' production and what it came from last year. I'm looking at his game log. There were only literally like 5 games the entire year that he did not score a touchdown. Every other game he was scoring multiple. He had 13 touchdowns, 136 targets, 79 receptions, and 1,200 yards. That was Mike Evans with 13 touchdowns. Chris Godwin, 130 targets, 83 receptions. So the same amount of targets, more receptions, over 1,000 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns.
That'll do it.
We always talk about how touchdowns are one of the most volatile things in the sport, and you can't really predict it. I mean, that is case in point. That's why.
Yeah.
Right there is why. Now, I think we have multiple years of historical data to prove that Mike Evans is going to get more touchdowns consistently than Chris Godwin.
He's an X.
I don't think that's without a question. He's an X. He has the deep playability. He has he's a big play threat, which is honestly why he's such a good underdog guy and has been for so long in best ball. But with Chris Godwin, look, if I can get 1,000+ yard receiver as a wide receiver 36 in my fantasy drafts, like that's a hands down smash draft, auto draft, and then I can just hope that he's going to get more than 2 touchdowns in a year, which I know, how dare I assume that? But I mean, you're literally talking about the difference between a mid wide receiver 3 and a mid wide receiver 2 if he just gets like 2 or 3 more touchdowns.
Yeah, and we've seen like earlier in his career, he had seasons of 7 touchdowns, 9 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns. Since then, 5, 2, and 3 touchdown seasons. But even in the seasons where he had 5 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, he's finishing as a wide receiver 2. Why? Because he had 98 and 104 receptions respectively those 2 years. Last year, looking at Chris Godwin's receptions, he only had 83 receptions, right? And the reason being, they moved Chris Godwin out of the slot, and when you're getting less slot snaps, you're typically going to have less targets and less receptions, right? That's exactly what happened. The big headline this year, obviously, is that Chris Godwin is moving back to the slot, which should do numbers for his production and therefore his fantasy production as well. We're hoping that's true with Chris Godwin. Let's look at Brian Thomas Jr. with the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is a guy, when you're talking about slot versus X, we talked about 2 guys already. Josh Downs and how he fits next to Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman's not being an X, but then Chris Godwin next to Mike Evans, who's the best X in the league. Him and Christian Kirk are not going to take away from each other. When you're looking at how Christian Kirk plays, where he's getting his production, it's in the slot. Brian Thomas was drafted to be the X wide receiver in that offense. He played that role at LSU as well. He played alongside Malik Neighbors, who was playing a little bit in the slot. He had 68 receptions for 1,100 yards. That's an average of 17.3 yards per reception. That's very high. And then 17 touchdowns last year. Here's why I think that I would reach a little bit for Brian Thomas. This one's pretty simple. I'll keep it short and sweet. Because at his current price, which is wide receiver 43, there are players below him I would take over him. There are players that I think they're in the same range that I think are safer options, that I think have higher upside, whatever. But I think you're talking about putting him in an offense with enough opportunity and with a quarterback that hasn't really... I mean, Calvin Ridley was good last year, but he wasn't great. If Brian Thomas and Trevor Lawrence develop chemistry, you could see his playoff advance rate, Brian Thomas Jr.'s, being fairly high. I think there is a world where he comes out and scores 7 to 9 touchdowns in his rookie year. And if he does that, and if he also can get upwards of 109, 110 targets, Brian Thomas Jr. can be extremely productive, and you're getting him at wide receiver 4 prices right now. And so I know this is a rookie, so it's going to be another like, oh yeah, you guys are just picking out some rookies here. But he's a rookie that I think was dropped specifically in a pretty good situation, and he also has pretty high touchdown upside being an X. I mean, that's what his skill set is. And so with that, I'll lean a little bit more on him, and I think I will be drafting some Brian Thomas Jr. in my fantasy drafts this year just for the upside alone.
Yeah, another low-key guy in that offense, the same offense too, is Evan Ingram, who we don't even have written up in this video, but literally, with Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk and Travis Etienne going off for like the first half of the season, Evan Ingram was the lead receiving threat in that offense last year.
And I think that
like that's just crazy.
And I don't necessarily I think that Brian Thomas Jr. is as talented, if not more talented, as a pass catcher than Evan Ingram is. Like I think that that shows how much opportunity there could be.
How much opportunity there could be, and how good of a value like both of those guys are.
Both
honestly.
of them are great values.
Jaxon Smith-Njigba is going to be our last guy here. We have had like dedicated videos. He's been on the thumbnail with our Stats Don't Lie video that we did like a month ago. If you haven't seen it, check it out. We did a ton of statistical research on the wide receivers that you want to take shots on. And with JSN, he is one of those guys going behind Brian Thomas Jr. right now in ADP and fantasy, where we would draft him over Brian Thomas Jr. I think we would prefer to take a shot on him just because he has a year under his belt of development, and he showed very, very good flashes last year. Tyler Lockett showed some regression, but he was still a little more productive than we expected, and that kind of took away from JSN's production. This year, you're looking at a completely different offense with Mike McDonald now being the head coach. Obviously, the defense is going to look primarily different, but they're also bringing in Washington's OC, which is a pretty big deal considering the air raid offense that they had. I know Geno Smith has his limitations, but we saw what his upside was in 2022. And if you can get 80% of what Geno Smith was in 2022 and apply that to 2024, and assuming that Tyler Lockett is going to continue to regress as he demonstrated last year, I think that bodes well for JSN's production outlook this year, especially at wide receiver 46 prices.
Yeah.
46. That's a low-end wide receiver 4. I think you're looking at that price, and I don't think anyone can deny, whether you're high or low on JSN, I don't think anyone can deny that his production upside is much, much, much higher than that. So much higher than that. I mean, I could see him reasonably going in the same range. I could see him reasonably going above Jordan Addison. And Jordan Addison's going as the wide receiver 39. I could see him reasonably going in the range of Chris Godwin and Calvin Ridley going, in the early 30s, and he's going all the way down as wide receiver 46. So take a shot on that guy for sure.
Yeah, do us a huge favor. This is how many of you are subscribed, and the best thing that you can do to support the channel is help us get that number up. The more subscribers we have, the better content we can put out, because the more people watch our videos. It just makes a lot of sense. So do us a huge favor and make sure you subscribe. If you enjoy fantasy content, if you're going to be playing fantasy football this year, we are going to as well. So we're going to try to give you all of the advice that we can to win your fantasy leagues. We appreciate you guys watching today, and we'll see you later.